guess is, I mean, I never studied economics, which I'm not sure is a disadvantage based on what I've learned. But I think there are still people who can graduate in economics without really understanding the stuff that David's covered in 10 minutes tonight that, you know, is quite superficial, but is still fundamentally affects the way you look at money in the economy. Is that helpful?
Yes, and I kind of elaborated a point that you made, distinguishing the financial world from the commercial world and the productive economy.
Yeah.
And made that all kind of one whole, which isn't actually, it's a kind of economy.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions and then we'll open it up to everyone. Can I just first ask this, did you call it public money creation? So would that allow us to escape growth dependency, or would that also be debt-based?
Yeah, so growth dependency is the idea that a lot of politicians have, that we need to have indefinite economic growth regardless of the social and environmental consequences, that's kind of just necessary for our economic prosperity. One of the reasons, so we've just published a paper which looked at what are the drivers of growth dependency, what are the reasons why we have there is this feeling that we need to have like indefinite economic growth. And one of those is that we have a monetary system that relies on getting people into debt. So like money is created at the same time as debt is created, because money is created when banks make loans or create debt. And in order to pay the interest on that debt, people need to get richer, or the economy needs to get richer. The economy needs to expand, and therefore we need economic growth. So if we can have a monetary system that is not debt-based, as you say, then that can remove one of the major drivers of growth dependency, and then we can gear our economy towards some measure of success, which is kind of more linked to people's like real experience.
And what do you both see as the kind of main steps we could take as individuals? Or, I mean, it seems like it's beyond, individuals have a lot of power, but then there needs to be some big financial shifts to escape growth dependency and this debt-driven financial system. Is there any big shifts that you could outline?
Interesting.
Because for me, that it's the growth dependency which I find so sort of terrifying from an ecological point of view. Yeah. I mean, and actually, could you have a growth-driven economy without destroying the environment, or the two just seem to go hand in hand?
So there is the decoupling argument that says that we can get so much better at resource use that we can decouple economic growth from ecological damage. I guess the lab are agnostic on that. I mean, there are some people who will take very well researched and very firmly held positions on why that's entirely possible or entirely impossible. I don't know the answer to that, and thank God we're not a growth campaign, otherwise we'd be in problem because of that. However, it's quite clear to me that when growth is pretty much the point of the economy, that we've got a severe problem, basically. When we cannot, the only way our economy can operate is by creating growth, then we've got a problem, not least because right now, the main criteria for the way money is allocated in our economy is the financial return, not the environmental impact. And even separating those two out is nonsense these days. You know, you only have to imagine a plane, and this is not my argument, this is Kate Raworth's argument. She makes a very good argument about this in Donut Economics. Imagine a plane that only kept on accelerating. It doesn't take a genius to realise that plane is going to hit a problem soon, and that is exactly where we're going with that. My honest answer in terms of what we can do is a little bit clearer, and what I can't tell you is exactly how it will all add up to the shift we want. And some of it's financial and some of it isn't. I mean, I think we all have to use less stuff. And that is financial in a way, because ultimately, you know, when it gets to the argument, it's a bit of a circular argument about, you know, what companies want, what makes money and what people want. And you just go round and round in circles about that, you know, we have to supply, I don't know, clothes that are made within 5 days of being seen on the catwalk because that's what the public want. And then the public buy it because that's the only thing they've got. And because there's a huge industry designed to promote that to them. And so for me, there is definitely something about using consumer power full stop where we can. You know, it's a really nice thing you did today with these are, by the way, I should point this out to all of you, these are biodegradable plant plastic, which, you know, it's things like that, small things. But I do think there's something about putting your voice on top of that and asking your suppliers. So Labour Behind the Label do a great stuff in terms of that. Likewise, we can do that in finance. Ultimately, at the moment, we unfortunately have the problem where in a lot of cases, in terms... Oops. That's okay. Like, join in, it's fine. You know, in a lot of cases at the moment, we do still pay a premium for things like, you know, the biodegradable cup, or certainly in terms of fast fashion versus high quality ethical fashion, there's often a premium. I'm wearing H&M, not massively proud of that, but, you know, so, you know, I think we have to face that will only be a choice for some. Those that do have the money, also massively important is to invest in the future that we want, basically. You know, if you can invest in, well, first of all, if you can move your money to a savings provider that will invest and build up those companies, help them get to the point where they really have some clout in the market, great. If you have more money than that, you can take a risk and you can invest directly in those companies. There are loads of platforms now that will connect you, peer-to-peer, crowdfunding, whatever, into directly investing in them. This is unfortunately only a privilege of some at the moment. There are some, however, that I will, you know, say, like Abundance Generation, one of the organisations we've worked with for many years, their investments start at £5. So it's not completely inaccessible. So I do think there are certain things we can do if we have consumer choice and if we have money to invest.
It seems like a bit of a catch-22 in that from an ecological point of view, with environmental degradation, it's both growth-driven but then also our addiction to consumerism. But I wonder sometimes whether it's almost made out as though that's our most natural state of being, is to want to consume all the time, but it's like all the advertising and marketing that makes us feel less than complete and that we need to buy more to it's just as
I don't know whether consumer PR is part of the productive economy. That might be a controversial thing to say. It's not my domain, but it's like that when there are industries devoted to understanding and then exploiting human need to promote selling more stuff. How is that any better than the housing bubble? I'm not sure, really. Yeah, you know, we have to question that sort of thing, and that's not easy to do because it means stepping against society in a number of ways, and that's not something we often feel able to do.
What would an economy that has values at the centre rather than a supposedly rational economy, but one that values human interconnection and social ties, what would that look like? So not so much about how we shift out of where we're at, but what would a good economy look like?
David, I've talked so much. You start.
Well, one thing I think, and this is maybe not quite answering your question, but one thing I think is really important is that we change who is making the decisions about the economy, and so we make sure that the people who are making decisions are more reflective of the population at large. So the Monetary Policy Committee is the most powerful committee at the Bank of England. It's got 9 members. Just one is a woman. They've just appointed another man to the committee. They've all got a background either working for the Bank of England or in the financial system. That is a problem. They're making like incredibly important decisions that affect, you know, every aspect of our economic lives. And in order to make good decisions, they need to understand like the labour market, how the economy is performing in different parts of the country, what is really going on the ground. And I think a problem we have at the moment is that a lot of the people making decisions are kind of too remote from the lived experiences of most people. So changing the culture and the people making decisions in our economic institutions is one really important thing we need to do to change the system as a whole.
I suppose I'd start from that point of saying, I think half the point of an economy of the future would be that, like, I don't get to decide what that looks like, that we all do, and there's something about restoring the primacy of the things everyone values that go beyond just money. I'm not saying it's not important, it is, but the things that go beyond that, and us being able to have an economy that reflects all of those things. And so, you know, I know what I really care about, and you can take, you know, various values barometers of the UK opinions, and you'll get fairly similar things about, you know, your kids, your family, your having time off, having a meaningful job or a meaningful occupation, having a healthy environment, all those sorts of things. I think for me, the key thing is that at the right level, people have a say in that, and I do think the way our economy works has become one of the barriers to that, because very often decisions are made at a very high remote level on a pretty financial basis, not thinking about other values, and then, you know, that's where you get local resistance to developments that don't work for the community. You would hope that actually in an economy of the future that was more balanced, it wouldn't be opposing groups. That didn't need to happen. That's what I would hope for.
Thank you. Seems like ethical banking and localization are good things. And early on you said that, I'm just going to ask one more question before we open it up, that things like blockchain just is status quo innovation, or can be status. Do you see that there could be a way for new technologies to support positive changes to our economy, or is technology in general something to be really wary of?
So my answer would be yes, totally, but it's not the technology that's the deciding factor. So take blockchain. I went to this blockchain symposium recently, and I was in awe of a guy who stood up in front of the whole room and described blockchain as a crappy database with a couple of unusual features. And I thought, well, you know, you've named it there. The fact is, there are things about blockchain that lend themselves to certain applications. The fact that trust is shared among a group of people, there's no central authority. You know, I can imagine there are ways to use that spread power among people, great, but it's the humans that implement that. It's who are they, why are they doing it, what's their business model, you know, how are they going to make money, how are they going to create value, how do we get a say in what they're doing, who invests in them, and how, you know, how quickly do they have to pay them back. It's those things for me are the deciding factor. So we have 3 levels of innovation. I won't go through them all now, but suffice to say that the level that we're most interested in is the one that transforms the relationship between the industry and society, that actually says finance is here to do something else in the world, it's here to serve us. You could have a tech-based application at that highest level. The key thing is what it's used for and why, and the governance and the business model behind that. So we're not pro or anti. You know, you had Brett last week. I know he doesn't like the tech-neutral stance, but that's where we stand at the moment, is that, you know, actually it's about what the tech is used for and who is using it that's important.
Thank you.
I think I'm kind of agree with you that technology in itself, or technological innovation, is not just going to save us from the challenges we face. What technological innovation in money gives us the opportunity to do is to redesign our monetary system. So like there's a particularly exciting opportunity that we have with digital currencies to have a publicly issued version of digital cash. So this is like, you know, a digital version of notes and coins that are issued by the Bank of England. At the moment, if you want to store your money and make payments in anything other than cash, you're basically only able to do it using deposits stored at a commercial bank. Because cash is declining as a means of payment, more and more we're making payments with cards, with our phones or online. That means that our money is basically being privatized. And that is a problem because it puts an enormous amount of power in just a handful of institutions, big banks that facilitate payment. And that means that we're all at risk when those banks fail or when they experience a technological failure like, as we've just seen with TSB or indeed with card companies like Visa. So we should use this opportunity with the technological innovation that's happening with digital currencies, not necessarily blockchain, but to create a digital version of cash issued by the Bank of England. Everybody should be able to store their money safely at the Bank of England, 100% risk-free, and save and make payments without having to rely on a bank. This is a really exciting opportunity that we could see in the coming kind of decade or so.
Because without that, is the kind of war on cash quite dangerous for society?
Yeah, absolutely. So saying that is absolutely, we're definitely not advocating getting rid of cash.
Okay.
Lots of people, 2.7 million people rely exclusively on cash for their day-to-day payments. Millions more of us use cash on a regular basis. All the indication is that if we're given a free choice, lots of us, me included, will continue to use cash for a long time to come. There's vested interests that want to see the back of cash. Banks, for whom it's expensive to provide cash infrastructure, card companies who make a bigger profit if we're using them to
So
make payments.
should we get money out at the ATM to spend it rather than paying with a card?
You should. The important thing is that you have a choice, that you're able to use your money in the way you choose.
Right, audience. Yes.
Okay, yeah, David, just something that you said during your original presentation. It was about National Investment Bank and that idea. And that's something that I heard a lot during the last election as an idea from Jeremy Corbyn, John McDonnell, the idea of setting up a national investment bank. And I just wanted to find out your general perspectives. Bringing politics into it might not be ideal, but politics plays a part in our lives. And would people like John McDonnell or Jeremy Corbyn, would they be radical in your view in terms of their position on the economy and their ideas in terms of maybe setting up a national investment bank? Is that radical? Is that radical enough? Is that a step in the right direction?
Yeah, so in my presentation I talked about the fact banks have the power to create money. They're not doing a very good job of, from the perspective of the wider economy. They're not lending towards activities which most of us benefit from, which create jobs and boost wages. One thing we need to do is to have more diversity and better business models within the banking system. There's two positions which Labour have at the moment which I think are really good. One is they say we should set up a national investment bank. Another is that we should not, the government should not give up its majority stake that it has at the moment in RBS. We should use the RBS being in public hands we should break it up, create a load of regional stakeholder banks. Those are banks which are owned and managed in the interests of the customers or the people that work for them. I think where it would be good to see Labour being a bit more radical is on this question of kind of money and monetary policy. I think at the moment they're doing a review into how the Bank of England could work differently, and we'll kind of wait to see the outcome of that. But I listen to what Labour politicians say about kind of building an economy that works in the interests of the many, not the few, and I think that such a crucial part of realising that vision is reforming money, not doing more quantitative easing, but doing public money creation. And I think hopefully we're working hard to get Labour on board with that.
How much control does the country actually have over what kind of direction the economy takes? The creation of money, all these things. How much freedom is there to actually do these things, or is there legislation that will stop? For instance, and would you say that there's an opportunity now to create something that is free of control, like from breaking away from the more corporate structure that's really rooted over the last few decades, that has fed the consumer growth economy. You know, is there an opportunity now that didn't exist before? Has something shifted so that we have a great, I'm not being very explicit, but for instance, does the EU control a lot of what we're allowed to do or not allowed to do? Is there an opportunity coming up where we can take advantage or see things as an advantage rather than as a desperate, awful mess that we're in?
I think that the desperate, awful mess that we're in creates a bigger space for like really radical ideas about how we fix the economy. I think that I personally feel that some of the drivers of the Brexit vote was people just getting absolutely fed up with the huge disparities in our economy between London and like the Scotland and Wales and other regions in England, with people seeing the huge amount of wealth that's flowing to the financial sector and the kind of very little benefit that a lot of what the financial sector is doing creates for the rest of the economy, and so I think there is clearly an urgency, and there's other issues as well, like the kind of intergenerational inequality, how the amount that people have to pay for rent or mortgages is just getting completely out of step with people's wages, particularly for young people. These are all urgent problems and huge challenges facing any political party that's trying to get into government, and I think there is an opportunity in the urgency of this situation for these kind of radical proposals. There is a question about whether Brexit does give us a little bit more freedom in terms of the kind of what the Bank of England can do to finance different projects, but I think my general view is that there is always the space. If we have the will to bring about these reforms, I think we'll be able to do it, whatever the circumstances.
So I guess I just add to that in that, so firstly, the lab's work is more on the industry side generally, so we're less focused on public engagement. And we don't write many reports, but we're about to release one. Because we do see an opportunity, and you probably won't hear about it on the front pages because it's about financial regulation, which is not generally something the public wants to engage with that much. But we see two things now that can fundamentally shift the shape of the financial industry, and that's the combination of Brexit and Fintech, that basically there is an opportunity with Brexit and with the way that we regulate Fintech. It is evolving fast, for better or worse, and for radical change or not. There needs to be a regulatory response to both Brexit and the rise of financial technology. Now, that could be a choice to just go, okay, let's just keep going with the status quo. Let's try not to change anything. We don't think that's adequate. It could be, oh God, let's turn into Casino UK, let's deregulate and let's try and be, sort of the offshore of Europe, basically. And that's obviously not the way that the lab thinks it should go. We think it's an opportunity for the regulators and the politicians that govern them to actually just ask a very simple question about what is finance here to do, and can we actually work out what the purpose of the financial system is, and can we engage people in the UK in that conversation? Because no one's ever asked me, and it's, ultimately the regulations are set by the regulators who are overseen by, the Treasury effectively, and obviously there's elected politicians in charge of them. We should have a say in this. So we think there is a huge opportunity coming to have that conversation and then regulate for that purpose. So instead of regulation being all about trying to find the bad behaviour and sort of get rid of it, we call it regulatory whack-a-mole. It's not our phrase, it's in academics, but the idea that you see bad behaviour, you hit it, and then another bit comes out, you hit it. Instead, to say, what kind of finance system do we want? What kind of finance system, what should it be serving in the real world? And then to regulate for that. So I do think there is an opportunity. I think whether you see this as an extraordinarily interesting and dynamic time or a complete disaster or a bit of both, you know, there is a moment here, and I'm hopeful that the activity of organisations like the Lab and Positive Money, but also just the wider kind of slightly febrile environment around this now, can lead to some change. I mean, the third thing, which might be the opportunity, and it's not an opportunity we wish to happen, would be another financial crisis. And that is not inconceivable at all. And I think one of the big questions is, if stroke when that happens, are we ready? What do we do? I think that's a question we ask ourselves a lot, to be honest. And we have. Sorry?
What do you answer?
Our answer is we need to do more to join up, to prepare for it. And we're trying to. It's not easy, as you can imagine. We're relatively small organisations still with relatively limited budgets, but where we can, we're increasingly connecting up our work. And I would say we're increasingly finding our spaces and how we can support each other. But it goes way beyond us. It goes to the academics, it goes to the politicians, it goes to the public as well. You know, what would we do?
Yeah. And you just said it's either on or it's off. Do you know what I mean? It could happen, but we don't know it will. I kind of think it will. Do you want to hazard a guess of what, when?
No, I don't want to hazard a guess. I think it's a very dynamic system. I don't think you can predict the behaviour. I think that's half the point of a system as complex as this.
So Anna, when you were sort of talking about the economy of the future that you'd like to see, and you wanted a lot more choice in the system, particularly important decisions. And it seemed to me that like what you're really hitting upon is you want more and better democracy, but you didn't actually use the word democracy. So, and I think sometimes like conversations within these kind of groups often like hit on this idea of having more sort of, I don't know, like power of the entire system. But really the way we get that is by improving democracy as a thing. I know it's a separate point to this whole financial.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So like what do you think of like the current state of, you know, how we run politics and democracy in this country, and what would you kind of, what changes to the institutions would you make if you could?
Big question.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I mean, it's not within my remit at the Finance Innovation Lab, and we are a registered charity, so I have to be careful. It's not an easy environment for charities to talk about democracy. I guess I'd say two things. One thing in general, which is that I think having one of the downsides of having like, you know, fairly short-term electoral cycle is future generations don't really get a look in. So I would like a third chamber that's like the chamber of future generations that actually has to input into all of the decisions. Don't ask me exactly how it would work. You know, obviously they're going to have representatives, and presumably we'd need to elect them, but I don't see any other way that we can get the voice of the next 5 generations down the line in the decisions we're making today that have fundamental impact on the world that they're going to be living in. So that would be my general contribution to a very varied debate. I don't think, you know, you said it's a slightly separate issue. I don't think it is. You know, I do think when you look at the power that the financial system wields over our lives and really the lack of control and power we feel over it, and I dare say many politicians feel over it, I do think it is a democratic issue. And I think, you know, that power is power, whether it sits within the state or whether it sits within the market. And so I do think that part of making finance more democratic is about making democracy more democratic as well, if you see what I mean. I think they're two sides of the same coin. David, come on, you've got to answer that one. If I did that, you have to.
I think you've touched on this, and I think I mentioned it a little bit in my talk, that like there is a problem at the moment with there being institutions which are public institutions, financial regulators, central banks, which are kind of seen as off limits or as like that we kind of have no control over. Whereas actually, as you said, exactly, like financial regulation exists to serve a purpose, and we can define that purpose. If we want a financial system that does a better job of serving the real economy of like maybe reducing inequality, we can make that the job of regulators, and just as if we want to move our financial system towards one that supports a low carbon economy, we can make that a job of the Bank of England. And we've actually just published a paper outlining how that could happen.
Yes.
I just wanted to know if there was actually any examples that, like, within the global economy that are doing anything that has been discussed tonight, you know, in any sort of tangible way that we can look to as an example to go forward with. And I also wanted to know, I can sort of think of Argentina and maybe Greece, which have had two sort of bankruptcy and then like borderline bankruptcy as a nation, and sort of a lot of talk about how they could revolutionise their economy. And they had some radical ideas for Greece, but they basically were shunned if they wanted to remain in the EU. I'm not sure about Argentina, but I just sort of wanted to know if there's actually, now that we are really a global economy, like actually how much room is there to move if we're wanting to sort of, you know, keep our currency strong and be able to travel to Europe and make sure the pound is good. Like, it just feels so interlinked and tricky to sort of extract yourself and maybe do something a little avant-garde or even slightly different to what currently exists.
I think there's increasing room to move, or I'm seeing space being made to move at the city level, actually. Whether it is, I mean, Barcelona is a classic example. There's a huge social economy and a huge sort of effort to devolve and make more accountable budgetary decisions. I mean, you do have participatory budgeting examples across the world and some in the UK. And then you have places in the UK as well that have actually tried to take much more control over their economy. My memory has failed me. The place in the north that's gone for... Preston, thank you. Yeah, so Preston, which I love very much, has an excellent bus station. They also have a flipping excellent approach to managing community wealth, and have worked with the local anchor institutions like universities that have a lot of spending power to actually, you know, sort of keep wealth within the city and use spending to create jobs. And then you've got Bristol, which is developing an amazing city economy based on sustainability. So for me, the city level is where I'm seeing the most interesting work. It's like you say, there are examples to differing degrees at the national level. But just as an aside, about this time last year, I went to Stockholm. Mainly out of curiosity, I have to say. I was invited to take part. There was this session with a group of academics, like combining scientists, futurists, and people like me who were trying to build different futures. And we spent 2 days trying to come up with a vision of the future, basically. What would it take to get from now to a sustainable Anthropocene, as they called it? And we were 5 groups, and we came up with 5 different scenarios, very different in some senses. But the one thing that was common to all of them was the end of the nation state, and that it was devolved down to city and region states. And you know, that was a big eye opener for me. I was like, okay, these are not just seeds I'm seeing here. This is a thing. So I think there was a question over here. Sorry, David.
Or just briefly, some examples we can look to for like how people are running their money and banking system well. So on Sunday, Switzerland, they're going to have a referendum about whether to introduce something called a sovereign money system, which is basically what I kind of described in my opening talk. So that would be the first time that has existed anywhere in the world, but it's very exciting. So look out for that. So that means you don't stop banks being able to create money. Banks are only able to lend out as much money as they as much money as they take in deposits, and then the central bank, or the government via the central bank, creates money to spend on things which society needs. In Germany, they have a much more diverse banking system and better kind of business models for banks. So they have like public banks, mutuals, so those are banks owned by the people that use them, And all the evidence is that these institutions should do a much better job of supporting local economies. Germany is a much, wealth is more evenly distributed around the country. And then I was talking briefly about digital cash or a public digital currency. That's something that's being looked at very seriously in Sweden. So Sweden is the country that's moved fastest away from cash. So that could be on the cards in the next few years. Very exciting.
Yes.
I have a clarification question and a question. David, you said that only 3% of money is physical cash. Is that in the UK or?
That's in the UK. I think in the world it would be a higher percentage.
And then my actual question is about, so just do you think about in your work the fact that, and it's related to your question, that the UK, I see the UK as the birthplace of capitalism, and then that was exported all over the world.
Yeah.
And do you think about that when you're thinking around alternative financial systems, alternative economies, all of that? What role how do those two things connect? The fact that this capitalist system that just destroys both society and environment, basically the earth, came out of here and went everywhere else. Yeah.
I think it's a very good question, and it's something I've thought about a lot, but not ever articulated an answer in public to, so bear with me if this is a slight collection of thoughts. I think the UK, and I think we've seen it in the past couple of years in a lot of the rhetoric around Brexit, likes to think of itself as a world leader. And I personally am deeply uncomfortable to the point of shame with some of the things the UK has, some of the roles the UK has played in the rest of the world and the impacts that has had on people, and particularly the impacts that still linger today. And I think, when it comes to capitalism, as the lab, we don't say we're anti-capitalist. What we do say is we don't think this version of capitalism is a particularly good one for people or planet, basically. And that actually we're much more supportive of more stakeholder approaches to capitalism, where you actually are putting people in control and in ownership of things like companies, resources, and so on, or at the very least giving them a stake in how they are used. I think we have a huge amount to learn from the rest of the world, places all over the world, about the way different economies are run. And I think we have a lot of assumptions to shake off about how we see the right or the only way to run an economy. I also think we have to address the inequalities of power in our global financial system. And those are both between areas, but they're also between different groups of people. And, we see that in the UK, we see that across the world. I certainly see it in terms of gender. I mean, that's a big one within Fintech at the moment, but I also see it in terms of, in all ways, including ethnicity, including income. Do the people who are in power and finance reflect the rest of the population? And until they do, how can we expect finance to really serve all of the population well? And we're trying to address that in our programs, in our own culture, in our advocacy. What I wouldn't say the lab is good at, I'm not really sure any of the financial reform movement is good at, is sewing all those pieces together. I think we need a lot more help to do that. There's organisations like NEON, the New Economy Organisers Network, who are also very active on this, and they are particularly drawing together sort of the impacts of neoliberalism and racism and looking at how those two things act on each other. And we've learnt a lot from them. I used to be on the board of that, and I've certainly learnt a lot from that, but I would say we're still in the process of learning. So we're definitely aware of it. I don't think we think about it enough, and I don't think we do enough about it. I think we have a lot more to learn on it. I really, really want the UK to
design the fairer, more sustainable financial system of the future. But I definitely don't think that we should have the arrogance to kind of assume that the financial system the reformed financial system that the world ends up with is going to be in the image of the one that we have now. And I think it's actually really interesting to see that some of the amazing innovations that are happening in money and banking in the world at the moment are happening in developing economies. I think particularly if you look at the development of mobile money, so the ability to store money and make payments using just a phone. I was in East Africa last year, and it's just amazing how even people who wouldn't have had a mobile phone kind of 5 years ago and now have access to a range of different financial services just on the most basic kind of smartphone, or not even a smartphone. And you can go to the tiniest village and there'll be mobile money agents who will take deposits, maybe even extend a line of credit to people in a community in the UK of an equivalent size, there'd be no chance of getting anything like that, particularly with the ongoing closures of bank branches. So, I've talked about the idea of digital cash. It's actually, and I mentioned Sweden, but it's also highly likely that will first happen in somewhere in the global south as well. So there's some exciting things going on in Ecuador and Senegal.
Surely there actually couldn't really be one particularly globalised economy. We've got Helena Norberg-Hodge coming on the 20th who's going to be addressing that in particular, because what we've seen with globalised economy is that it divorces the community from the land, and so that the education they get and the financial systems they're trying to fit in with have got no relationship to the land that sustains them, which causes a lot of environmental issues in those areas.
Yeah, I think whether there can be one, I think there's no one mould for the global economy that would work. I think the economy is by nature a global thing, but that it's actually made up of lots of local economies. And I think part of the problem is where you have dominant global trends and powers that are actually taking away space and power from the local economies.
Maybe one more question, or two more questions? Okay. Yes.
Okay. There are more comments, but if you've heard of these things and you know of any developments or recent research, please feel free to comment or answer. I'm very interested in something called Feminist Economics, and there are some famous feminist economists. One of them is called Marilyn Waring, and I don't know if anyone's heard of her. She's Australian. And she's got an excellent talk on YouTube called Who's Counting Sex, Lies and Global Economics, and it will change your life. It's a very, very good talk. She's obviously written a lot about this as well. So I think it's really important to try and apply a feminist lens, definitely apply a feminist lens to economics, because it's a very patriarchal concept that we have right now. And then we're kind of stuck in the same bubble of trying to, in the words of the famous feminist, master's house and master's tombs, that kind of thing. So, what was it? Audre Lorde said, we're all stuck in this master's house called patriarchy, and capitalism, racism is all a product of that. But we've only got those tools. We need to invent new tools. Yeah. There's a limit. Sometimes you have to use those tools to break the house down, and sometimes you need new tools. And when I don't know if you know the quote. Yeah, it's really good. So I think it's impossible to understand the injustice completely of the world without feminism. Yeah. It's a branch of sociology, so I think economics as well really benefits from that. And secondly, degrowth economics. That's something that really interests me. So first, the term was coined in 1972, so it's going back quite a long way. But they've kind of gone quiet in the last few years. So I wonder if you know of any developments or any, a lot of very clever activists and economic scholars and sociologists came up with this, but yeah, it's they're not very often listened to by the powers that be.
Yes, they're not, particularly not feminist economists, and I absolutely second you on that. A lot of our work draws on feminist economics. It's not what we lead with, but it very much is part of the analysis that we have. I don't have much to add on that, apart from if people are new to the concept, a really accessible and enlightening introduction to it that's really quite recent is Who Cooked Adam Smith's Dinner? And it has, you get the gist of it from the title. The answer is his mother, by the way, sorry to spoil it. Yeah, definitely. I mean, the homo economicus that a lot of both economics and implicitly a lot of financial decision making is based on is a man. And the reason I say that is because, you know, it is a sort of this false universal male that is assumed to have, you know, wasn't born of anyone, doesn't have anyone to care for, just exists free floating around. It's absolute nonsense once you dig into it, and yet it infiltrates so much thinking there. Degrowth, the only thing I guess I would add on that is there's a lot of research going on at Leeds University about it. There is Dan O'Neill is up there, who's quite a well-known author on degrowth. There's a ex-colleague of ours from sort of our civil society world is up there doing a PhD on degrowth in the housing market. It is still out there. It tends to get, I think, poo-pooed as just sort of too radical, effectively. I think it's a really interesting argument. Again, it's not one that the lab majors on, not because we don't think it's a useful or interesting argument, just because it's not our major focus. But you might be able to, given positive money work, talk a bit more about that.
Yeah. So just one other book I'd really recommend thinking about growth and moving beyond growth is Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. Just looking at a kind of different conception for how to think about success in the economy. Kate Raworth.
Donut, as in the round thing that you eat, yeah.
So we should think about the economy like a donut, but I'll leave you to read the book to figure out why.
Like a gift economy.
There's a what?
There's a TED Talk.
Oh, God.
It's actually also got a lot of feminist economics in it too. She's such a badass.
Even just Googling those terms like degrowth economics.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then feminist economics just yields a lot of different results like PDFs. And
There's a new...
There's a cool organisation in Catalonia, and there's an activist called Bilka Sekulova who's really cool on the degrowth side.
Oh, right, yeah. A lot of French and Canadian obviously started in France, so the French-speaking world produced a lot of literature about this academic literature. And the original idea was that the West has grown for 200 years and, you know, messed up the planet, and they step back and let the poorer countries do their growth. And yeah, there will be a cost to the environment, but instead of telling them not to pollute, I think the West, he says that Serge Latouche is one of the famous, I don't know if you've heard of Serge Latouche.
No.
He's like one of the founding fathers, I think. And that the West should step back and do degrowth, and it doesn't mean you'll have an unhappy life, just the focus of life changes towards anti-consumers, things like hobbies and culture and art and, you know, doing things together, communal life. And yeah, as you say, it's definitely dismissed as being too radical, but given the state of the planet, we kind of need radical solutions, don't we?
I often get told off for being too idealist and just not realistic, but I think the worst form of idealism is thinking that we can carry on as we are now and it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
We can't. Simple as that.
You know that famous, it's a quote by someone else, but David Attenborough immortalized the quote in the RSA introduction videos. He says, anybody who thinks you can have infinite growth from a finite planet is either mad or an economist. But the way he said it, it was great.
We have time for just one really quick question.
Does that make
Yes.
Yeah. So David, I was wondering then what do you think might convince the UK government to get on board, take a punt on public money creation Has anyone ever done it? What do you think might tip them over the edge and think, okay, that sounds like a great idea? And for Anna, do you think public money creation would be like your top way at the moment for reforming money? Or if you had to choose one of them, what would it be?
I think it's. I think the first thing you have to do to move from where politicians are, or the current government is, to thinking about public money creation is just to get rid of a load of old kind of orthodoxies which are outdated. So one is that public money creation as an idea imagines a new relationship between the Bank of England and the government. At the moment, people in the government are very hesitant about kind of thinking that the Bank of England could create money in a different way because they feel like the Bank of England is independent. We shouldn't kind of tamper with it. It's been given a job to do, and we can't change that. We think that all of that is it's just outdated. It's there is a case for having an independent Bank of England, but as we said, it's a public institution. We can change the job that we've given it to do. So that's one thing, is that we need to kind of shift the mindset of the people in power. Positive money strategies, we also need to build a kind of movement of people saying we can have a different economic strategy. So that's hopefully where some of you might come in. And Positive Money, if you sign up to our mailing list, we kind of are often doing campaign actions to try and support interventions in Parliament or to kind of lobby the Bank of England in other ways. And we also have a network of local groups around the country that put on their own events or do their own campaigning as well. So join our movement to try and create some political pressure. And then there's also got to be a shift in the kind of intellectual space. So one thing we think is really important is there are already lots of academics, economists, some of whom I mentioned, who think that public money creation is a good idea. We've got to create a space for more economists to speak out and kind of mobilise them to take action, and again sort of create some political pressure. And I think the more that there's academics saying that public money creation is a good idea, the more politicians will feel able to give it their support as well.
So to give you one direct and one frustratingly unhelpful answer, I think public money creation is a good idea. Actually, way back in the day when Positive Money started out, the lab helped to incubate Positive Money, so we are very supportive. We like David, he's great, and all the other staff equally. In terms of, though, what's the one thing? There isn't one thing. I mean, that's the whole thing. It is far too complex a system to do that. And I guess if you imagine a woodland where it's all got out of balance and some trees are really far too big and some things are just tiny little seedlings and you need them to be bigger, and it's just, you can't, there's not one thing. It's a very Western thing actually, just let's just come in and nuke it with weed killer or something. And actually what we have to do is tend to this and shift the balance in the ecosystem. We can chop down a big tree, another one will grow. It's about lots and lots of different changes that will ultimately over time help cultivate a different financial system. Might in the end look very different to the one that we have now, but there's not one defining thing that's created that difference. And I'm sorry that's probably unsatisfactory, but if I knew that one thing, I would throw all of our weight behind it and I would not stop until I'd done it, but it's just not like that.